Our next guest says it's time Americans stop their petty political squabbling and come up with some big ideas to solve the country's massive problems. Woody Brock is the author of American Gridlock, Why the Right and Left Are Both Wrong. He's also the president and founder of Strategic Economic Decisions, advice is sought by financial institutions, corporations, and investors. He joins us now from the NASDAQ market site. Woody, good to have you with us.
Thanks.
I was just looking at the last 100 years. You know, the 20th century, we saw the rise of the automobile, the road system in the United States. Before that, we had railroads crisscrossing the U.S. We sent an American to the moon. We started the 21st century squabbling over how to repair the World Trade Center. Why is America in gridlock?
There's several reasons. The first reason is that the problems we face are extremely difficult politically. Take, for example, entitlements. It's not easy to say we are going to cut everybody's Social Security if you need to do it. So we avoid these decisions. We kick the can down the road. A minute ago you were talking to me and you said, why don't we have the political will to do the right thing? The problem here is the question assumes we know what the right thing to do is. And the point of my book was to take entitlement spending, Social Security and Medicare, which is a disaster, to take the dead decade we're in right now where kids can't get jobs, to take other issues like preventing financial crises, perfect storms like we just lived through, and using new ways of thinking, new forms of logic like game theory and the economics of uncertainty to show that there are win-win solutions to these problems that don't require the stale left-wing, right-wing debate that you hear in the media every day. In other words, you transcend gridlock and you come up with better solutions that are win-win. That's what's needed.
To your point, though, that maybe we don't know what to do, I wonder if that's really the assessment here. I get the impression, as a Canadian looking south of the border, that American politicians are more interested in stabbing each other in the back than doing what's right on a long-term basis. We know what needs to be done. It's just it's not politically palatable.
That is partly true and partly not true. Let me give the example of our #1 financial catastrophe for the long run. That is a $50 trillion unfunded liability for exploding medical costs, correct?
Mm-hmm.
The solution to that, which was not incorporated in the Obama plan, is if you're going to give a lot more access to health care to a lot more people, you've got to increase supply faster than you increase demand. If you increase supply, and only if you increase the supply of medical services, which goes beyond doctors, faster than demand grows, then not only can you have the coverage everybody wants, but you can cut the nation's bill for doing this in half. This is not a minor point. It is not widely understood. To prove that this is true, you've got to use some heavy mathematics, but it is true. So there's an example of our #1 problem, and no, they don't know the answer. So they squabble about whether the poor should be insured.
You also recommend in your book here that America needs a domestic Marshall Plan, the Marshall Plan tied to getting the European continent back on its feet after the Second World War. It sounds like that's the kind of thing where you would have politicians saying, are you kidding me? Throw more money at a problem when we don't have the money in the first place?
Your point is absolutely correct. Once again, my point remains valid. They don't know the correct answer. And the reason is, for the point you just made, everybody assumes that if you had a Marshall Plan, a domestic infrastructure of the plan that everyone says we need, that doing that would bankrupt the country. This is incorrect. If you borrow and you invest the money in projects that have high rates of return on capital, like our great interstate highway system that you mentioned, had a 13% rate of return on capital, the bond market loves you. There's no problem borrowing money at all. We can easily afford it. If, on the other hand, you continue to borrow as we have for 25 years, simply to keep people in their jobs, then you do not have a return on capital at all, and you saddle the grandchildren with debt, and the bond market goes on strike. So the fundamental point is there are good deficits and bad deficits. This distinction is never made. Once it's made, the virtue of an infrastructure Marshall Plan is clear. Principally, we have not put a new roof on our house in this country, and nor has England in half a century. Our roofs are leaking. Our bridges are falling down. Our electric grid is pathetic. So we need a massive plan, but only picking projects that have a positive rate of return on capital. That's the crucial point.
Before we let you go, the Volcker rule. There are those who said that the financial institutions crumbled because we didn't have enough regulation. We bring up the Volcker rule. They say that we will see our economy collapse again if we bring that in. It sounds like it's not the government that's the problem there with the Volcker rule. It's Wall Street.
Well, when you say the Volcker rule, let's say that's a code word for we've got to limit leverage. We had limits on bank leverage of 10 to 1. That's to say leverage of 10 to 1 for the banking system many, many times. It didn't bring the system down. What Volcker is doing and Lord King in England is saying, how in the world did we allow our banks to have 30, 40, and 50 to 1 leverage? Your Labrador Retriever knows that's going to cause a catastrophe. You can't do that. So Volcker's just saying we've got to go back and realize we've got to limit leverage or we're going to have more of these perfect financial storms. Now, Paul Volcker does not realize, but at Stanford University, very important new work that's been carried out in economics there has shown that in the real world, as opposed to the textbooks, high leverage, whether it's the families or the banks, is about 10 times more disastrous than we had previously realized. This is all the more reason we need to limit leverage, not just the Volcker rule, but in all sorts of things.
Well, we appreciate the opportunity to scratch the surface on the issues with you, Woody. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you.
Woody Brock is the author of American Gridlock, Why the Right and Left Are Both Wrong.